We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! This is Uruzi and this is part 4 of What If Naruto Conquers His Inner Demons. When Utakata discovers that Yagura is being manipulated by Akatsuki, he flees the hidden mist with the goal to save himself and his only friend. His solution? Find the other Jinchūriki and convince them to join his fight. But the Jinchūriki have more baggage than just the Bijū they contain, and if they can't create a cohesive unit from broken recluses, they may all be dead. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 9, The Slug's Solicitations. There's something different about you today. Utakata tried to hide the grin that crossed his lips, but his training hadn't gotten to the point where his emotional control was stronger than his childlike glee. You think? Yagura's pupil-less pink eyes scrutinized him, trying to pinpoint the change in his friend. After several moments, the gray-haired boy snapped his fingers in realization. You graduated, the Rokubi Jinchūriki beamed. Yep. He flapped his arms wildly, the oversized sleeves of his predecessor's blue kimono giving him the appearance of an awkward bat. Strips of white fabric were woven through the cuffs, matching the white sash around his waist that cinched the robe closed. Good job. You've been working hard. Utakata turned away, abashed. He looked out over the lake, listening to the water gently lap against the shore. I still have a ways to go. There's always more to learn, Yagura advised quietly, but everyone starts somewhere. And now you're further along on your journey. Every step makes us more of an asset to the village. Maybe then people will take us seriously. Yeah, the brunette agreed in a quiet voice. An asset to the village. Like his father had been. Maybe by serving the village, he would finally be seen as something more than a child. Or a nuisance. Maybe then he could finally do something good. Utakata floated over the land of lightning with his drifting bubble technique, looking down at the craggy country from high above. As difficult as the search for the Jinchūriki was, he would admit that it was a novel experience being able to casually explore the elemental nations like this. As casually as one could while running from both a criminal syndicate bent on his capture and the hunter Nin the hidden mist had surely deployed to continue tracking him. Still, the adventure was more than he'd experienced while in Kiri. While serving as a shinobi of the hidden mist, his missions had kept him almost exclusively relegated to the land of water. At first, he'd thought it a strange decision by the mist hierarchy, including his master Harasane. Then he'd thought it might be Yagura trying to protect him. Now it seemed apparent that the idea had been to keep the Rokubi contained to the village as much as possible. Whatever the reason, he'd been sheltered from the outside world, unable to properly view its majesty. Where the land of fire was warm and welcoming, its green canopies a splendor to a boy raised in dreary gray fogs, the land of lightning was all towering mountains capped in gray-white clouds. In the crevices of the mountain ranges flowed quiet, blue rivers. With his eyes closed, Utakata could imagine them reaching the ocean, trickling water bringing him a semblance of serenity. He took a deep breath and brought himself out of his trance. While he could enjoy the geography before him and how small it made him feel in the midst of everything happening in his life, the sheer enormity of his surroundings also worked against him. Unlike with Naruto, where he knew the story of the Kyuubi attack, all he knew about the Nibi and Hachibi Jinchūriki were that they were from Kyumo, which could mean anything. Were they in Kyumo itself? How old were they? What were their level of skill? Were they loyal to Kyumo, or was the relationship more tenuous, like Rashi's with IWA? Too many questions with no answers. He felt as lost as he had when he'd first left Kiri, wandering aimlessly and hoping for the best. It worked to find Rashi, he thought wryly. I wasn't even trying then. Of course, compared to how he'd accidentally stumbled upon the redhead after months of simply trying to evade Kiri's patrols, the weeks? Months? He'd lost track of time, it all just seemed to blur together, of traveling to and then combing over the land of lightning for any sign of something Jinchūriki-related was becoming irksome. Thunder grumbled above him, and Utakata glanced up to find that gray storm clouds had rolled in while he'd been lost in thought. He sighed and directed the bubble to descend into the mountain ranges below. As drab and gloomy as the land of water was, at least it was consistent. The land of lightning storms were sudden, frequent, and annoying. His method of travel was way too high up to make him comfortable amidst the lightning for which the country was named, so he was forced to temporarily halt his search each time a storm cropped up. He alighted on the ground when his camouflaged bubble popped and checked out his surroundings, looking for a cave or outcropping of rock for shelter. The rain didn't bother him, at least, not when it wasn't being manipulated by the Oinin to suppress his abilities, but there was something clean about the regional showers that made Utakata feel dirty for trespassing. When nothing immediately apparent drew his attention, the Kirinine began to jump across the land, keeping a keen eye out for someplace protective. As the skies opened up and a light rain began to fall, the Jinchūriki's sharp golden eyes spotted an unnatural protrusion off the side of a mountain. "What's that?" He angled towards the anomaly, eventually finding an overlook in a perch of rocks partway up a mountain to scrutinize what lay below. It looked like a temple built into the side of the mountains, a two-tiered structure with roofs of blue tiles styled like a pagoda, curved at the eaves. A staircase made of what the Kirinine could only assume was stone led from the temple to what he could now see was a rough path carved through the terrain. Someone lives all the way out here? For a moment, he struggled to imagine someone living so far outside the realm of civilization, but then he remembered Rashi and the redhead's decades of isolation. Could one of the Jinchūriki live here? The thought spurred him to move closer, careful to retain his footing on the slick geology. As he drew closer, he could make out the finer details of the temple, ornate wooden railings, bamboo blinds, white paneling. It struck him as strangely traditional in a world that was continually modernizing. Then again, Utakata had never been one to put much stock in faith, so any religious implications of the design were lost on him. Abstract statues of some creature, painted black and blue and with a mammalian appearance, flanked the front doors of the building. Strange design choice. Matatabi always did attract a fervent following. Saiken's voice in his head sounded almost bemused. Matatabi? Is that one of the Bijū? Something long and thin, almost like a senbon, settled against his neck. Unlike a senbon, it was sharp along its length rather than just the tips, a fact he knew by the edge that tickled his jugular. A presence behind him made itself known by demanding, "Who are you?" The voice was rough but feminine, with an authoritative edge that took no prisoners. With a calm that belied the tension coiled in his muscles, Utakata replied, "Just a refugee seeking shelter from the storm." A small gasp escaped his throat as the sharp edge held there nicked him. A drop of blood dribbled down his neck and mixed with the falling rainwater, lost in the sea of the storm. Refugees don't use genjutsu to appear out of thin air, so I'll ask again, who are you? She saw that? How long has she been watching me? Aware of his precarious situation, Utakata decided to drop the layer of chakra serving as his second skin. Acid dissolved the weapon holding him hostage, eliciting an unexpected hiss of pain from the kunoichi behind him and causing her to retreat. The Kirinine took the moment to distance himself from his assailant, turning around to face her. She was cradling one hand with the other, the long claws of the former retracting back into her nails. Dirty blonde hair partially covered her Kumo hideate and fell down her back in a single braided ponytail. Dark pants fell to mid-calf, a red sash slung around her hips, bandages covered the rest of her calves and the entirety of her forearms, ending in black, fingerless gloves. A black short-sleeved shirt with lavender-colored midriff completed her outfit. Furious eyes leveled a glare at him. "Whatever your ability is won't protect you from me. I'm not here for a fight," Utakata offered in a rush, trying to dissuade her from attacking. "Really, I'm just a bit lost." "You obviously use chakra, which means you're a shinobi," the kunoichi snarled. "And you're not from Kumo, which makes you a threat." "Nezumi Kedama." A fist-sized mass of darkness shrouded in indigo flame burst from her mouth. Utakata flipped through hand seals and saturated the rain with his chakra. Suetun, Suijin Hiki. Falling liquid consolidated into a wall of water meant to intercept the mouse hairball. Feet before the jutsu collided, the incoming mass split into multiple projectiles that zipped around the water formation wall. Golden eyes went wide as the individual fireballs closed in. What? He inverted the Suijin Hiki, wrapping himself in a sphere of water that barely cocooned him from each fireball's explosion. His defense lost cohesion, and he was blown backwards amid a field of debris. The rain helped quench the resulting dust, and Utakata looked up in time to see the kunoichi appear before him in a blur of dark clothes and pale hair. Claws sliced through his kimono and into his bicep, drawing lines of red along pale skin. The Kirinine hissed in pain, a sound echoed by the kunoichi across from him. Black eyes glared in hatred as she once more cradled her hand. What kind of jutsu is this? A curse. Utakata thought, his own hand gripping his injured arm. I'm really not interested in a fight, he insisted. My ability, it's innate, but controllable. And I'd be more than happy to deactivate it if you'd stop attacking me. I really was just looking at the temple for shelter. You're not going to convince me you have pure intentions, snarled the kunoichi. Kyumogakure does not take kindly to trespassers. That you would try to leverage the kindness of the Kyusho acolytes to advantage your village. Kyusho acolytes? The followers of Matatabi, I presume. And who's Matatabi? He asked aloud, annoyed that Saiken still hadn't clarified. How do you know of Matatabi? The kunoichi demanded. I don't even know who Matatabi is. Utakata protested. The seemingly permanent hostility in the Cloud Shinobi's voice and posture was becoming more worrisome by the second. He wasn't interested in engaging in a fight that would only distract and delay his mission, at least, more than it already had. She scoffed. You can stop pretending you're ignorant. Only a handful of people know the Nibi's real name. That temple is where the Nibi is? Utakata glanced over at the building in the distance, surprised at the revelation. No, asserted the kunoichi. The Nibi is right here. My name is Niyujito, and as a shinobi of Kyumogakure, I swear you won't escape me. Utakata didn't have a chance to marvel at his luck of stumbling across the two-tails Jinchūriki before she charged him. She slashed at him with elongated claws, apparently deciding that the damage she could do to him was worth the contact with his acidic skin. He weaved around her slashes, leaning backwards to avoid a kick with sharp toenails. Two nimble shinobi engaged in an aggressive dance. Fighting Yujito was so different from sparring with Rashi. The redhead's moves were rigid but purposeful, power behind every simple punch. But Yujito was constant movement, a whirling dervish, relying on the rending power of her elongated claws than any other physical prowess. In a way, the Kyomonin's taijutsu style perfectly complemented Utakata's own method of contorting around attacks, leaving his mind free to strategize. He dodged a downward slash aimed at his uninjured arm, jumping backwards when she used her feet to stab at his legs. She dove at him, turning herself into a spiraling corkscrew of sharp appendages. Utakata's hands flew through familiar seals, chakra intermingling with the rain. Suetun, by Kufu no Jutsu. Rain came together in a deluge that poured on the spinning kunoichi, driving her into the ground under its force. The renegade Kirinin had a brief moment to wish that he had some sort of restraining ninjutsu he could activate from afar, like the water prison technique, but without getting in range of the Kyomonin, before Yujito was back on her feet. She was drenched from his attack, a snarl on her lips, fury emanating from every molecule of her being. That fury seemed to morph into actual heat, an aura of steam emanating from her form. She's just like Rashi, Utakata deduced. Proficient with Katon and stubborn to a fault. Great! Rengoken! A fireball erupted from the kunoichi's mouth, rapidly growing to a diameter multiple times Utakata's height. He dropped flat to the ground, allowing acid to ooze out of his pores and erode the rocky terrain, creating a trench that he furrowed into. Heat seared his back as the purgatory flame roared by, fumes volatilizing off his acidic skin. With the Rokubi's gift, he burrowed through the ground, eventually popping up with an uppercut aimed at Yujito's jaw. The Cloud Shinobi flipped backwards to avoid the attack, her long toenails raking bloody gashes along his chest and dissolving against his acidic skin. They recoiled from each other, each nursing their own injuries. Utakata pulled his hand away from the lacerations on his chest, inspecting the blood staining his fingers. She could kill me if she wanted, but how she's attacking, she's just trying to debilitate me. She wants information. He looked up at the kunoichi across from him. I suppose it could be worse. At least we have the same goal. I don't suppose you're willing to listen to me now? He called. You're not going to kill me, and I don't want to fight you. We're in a... She charged him then, fire in her eyes and along her claws. Stalemate, he sighed, anticipating her acrobatics and weaving appropriately. The Kyomonin's chakra flared black and blue, the specter of a feline shadowing her form. Her speed suddenly increased, and Utakata suffered another slash across his chest in the face of the renewed onslaught. A small explosion, the result of her fire contacting his acidic skin, blew the pair apart and sent them tumbling across the rocky terrain in opposite directions. Utakata swayed unsteadily to his feet, shaking his head in an attempt to cure his disorientation. This isn't working. I was hoping to avoid this. He withdrew his bamboo blower as Yujito spat out another indigo-colored gout of flame. With a long exhale, a multitude of bubbles escaped the end and floated around him. When the mouse hairball split apart, the Kirin directed the bubbles out, each sphere capturing an incoming projectile and containing it. The immediate threat neutralized, he expelled more bubbles and sent them after the Nibi Jinchūriki, creating a field of floating spheres. Yujito charged through with lightning speed, her lithe form weaving among each obstacle with impressive grace. He manipulated the bubbles so they were closer together, and when she disappeared from view, he snapped his fingers, causing a series of miniature explosions. Green goo burst from each ruptured sphere, saturating the vicinity, and Utakata, in a sticky, viscous material. Ugh! What is this? The mist renegade craned his head to find the kunoichi behind him, her limbs stuck awkwardly to her body by the goo. More adhesive kept her glued to the ground, its elasticity tested with every gesture she made to escape. Utakata turned his body to face her fully, already at work on changing the chemical properties of the goo, covering himself to negate its sticky properties. Exasperated, and with a brief window of time to talk, he hurriedly explained, "Look, I came here to warn you that you're in danger." With as close as she was, it was easy to see the Kumonin's dark eyes narrow with suspicion. Kumogakure is aware of what's out there, not that it should matter to you. Utakata shook his head. I'm not talking about Kumo, I'm talking about you. You and the Hachibi Jinchūriki, she snorted. Kumogakure trained us to handle anything that comes our way. Whatever danger you think is out there is hardly a concern. He hesitated for a moment before responding, mentally noting that Yujito's pride seemed to be blinding her to his message. Maybe you believe that, but I don't think you really understand what you're up against. Akatsuki. You're the one who doesn't know what he's up against. Yujito shot back. Killer Bee-sama and I are more than capable of taking care of ourselves. Her chakra flared again, but instead of disappearing, it gathered around her and continued to grow, trails of steam rising from where raindrops hissed against the fiery aura. Utakata's mouth, open to respond to the kunoichi's assertions, became an "oh" of awe and trepidation as a towering two-tailed cat with a pair of mismatched eyes, one green, one yellow, and fur made of blue and black crackling flames took shape before him. She can summon the Nibi. The two tails roared, and Utakata felt his bones quake. One flaming blue paw came down, and the Kirin threw himself clear of the impact zone, though its reverberations shook the earth. With a yowl, flickers of flame shot off the Bijū's fur and formed into winged projectiles that Utakata realized were birds. Not good. They zipped towards him on swift wings, and Utakata expelled an acidic violent water wave at the ground that created a foxhole he dove into. With Seiken's acidic chakra oozing from his pores, he again tunneled away from the impact zone of the fiery flyers, explosions shaking the earth as he dug through the underground. Within seconds, he could hear the sound of rushing water, and as he broke through rock to find a river, fire filled the tunnel at his back, its heat searing. River water rushed into the tunnel and pulled Utakata into its cool embrace. The Six-Tails jailer kicked his feet to swim away as water and fire met, the river behind him suddenly boiling. His head broke the river's surface and he gasped in air, craning his neck to find the Nibi's head bowed over the area he disappeared into the ground. Utakata allowed the river's flow, swollen and rushing with the falling stormwater, to carry him far away from Yujito. Thunder boomed overhead, but even that wasn't enough to drown out the feeling of failure that thumped in time with his heartbeat. When he eventually reached the ocean that bound the land of lightning's southern coast, the storm had stopped, and he forced himself to summon a bubble that took him into the sky and away from the mountainous country. Face cupped in his palm, Utakata gazed down at the land far below with vacant eyes and heaved a sigh. He was at a loss for what to do next, and the past week of floating listlessly over the elemental nations had only deepened his melancholy. Wallowing does not suit you, no? He replied aloud. Because it sure feels appropriate. Setbacks are not uncommon. A setback? Utakata let out a laughing scoff that wouldn't have been out of place coming from Rashi's mouth. Is that what you think that was? I had her, Seiken. I had the Nibi Jinchūriki, and he gestured around him, as if the empty void of the surrounding sky was answer enough, left. You had no options. The slug's boyish voice was almost reassuring, though firm. Hostility is not conducive to your alliance. Works with Rashi, the brunette muttered, but not for you and me. Or you and Yagura, or Yagura and Isabu, Seiken listed. Nor has it helped you with Naruto. Utakata hummed his agreement, biting back the urge to tell the Bijū his comment had been more sarcastic than introspective. Saiken had a point, one further supported by the hostility Rashi seemed to hold for the Four Tails, for society as a whole. The redhead's animosity hadn't helped in their initial meetings with Naruto, and any additional strife among Jinchūriki, or between a Jinchūriki and her Bijū, was more likely to hinder their plans. So what do you suggest at this point? Press on, the Rokubi advised. When you encounter an obstacle, you work around it. Do you think I remained idle after being sealed? From experience, the Kirin already knew the answer, but he still replied, no. Then perhaps you should consider your next course of action rather than indulging your self-pity. With the slug's youthful timbre, it sounded like a suggestion, but the bubble user heard the command it was intended to be. Yeah, okay. Okay, he repeated, golden eyes scanning the ground below. So where are we? Who knows? You've been aimless since we left Matatabi's Jinchūriki. Utakata groaned, massaging his temples with thumb and middle finger. Yeah, I get it already. We've been going west since we left. From lightning, there's frost, hot water, then, I don't remember. If Kumo's off limits, then that just leaves the Ichibi and Nanabai. One of them's got to be in Suna, so I guess we'll go there. That sounds like a sensible plan. It's nice to know I have your approval again. There was no response from the giant gastropod. Utakata mused that Saiken seemed to have little appreciation for the lilt of sarcasm he'd acquired from Rashi. As the bubble continued to take him west, the brunette posed, why didn't you give me your chakra when I was fighting Yujito? Or against Rashi when he attacked me? It is not right for the Bijū to be in conflict. War and strife are concepts humankind has created to utilize my brethren and me for personal gains. We have our differences and personal squabbles, but to be forced to fight one another by humans, even our own Jinchūriki, would disrespect the wishes of our father. Your father, the one you know as the Rikudo Sennin. Golden eyes widened in surprise. The Rikudo Sennin? I thought he was a myth. He is not. Saiken didn't seem willing to elaborate, and the brunette felt that he would continue having questions if he fell down that rabbit hole, so he instead said, so I shouldn't rely on you in a fight against another Jinchūriki. The other Bijū don't seem to share your compassion, he noted wryly. I can only control my own actions. Contrary to popular belief, the Bijū are not all-powerful. Sure seems like it when you're staring one in the face, Utakata muttered, too annoyed to appreciate the slug's droll attempt at humor. His petulant mood was blown asunder, quite literally, by a buffet of wind that sent his bubble careening through the open sky. He bounced twice against the inside surface of the sphere before its elasticity failed, popping to send him plummeting to the ground far below. Within seconds, his bamboo blower was in his hands, another drifting bubble forming at its opening, but a second rush of air knocked the instrument loose from his grip. He made a grab for it, but it had already been blown free of his reach. A curse slipped past his lips as he tried to think of a way out of slamming into the approaching ground at terminal velocity. As if to prove how fruitless his efforts of forming another bubble would be, a third blast of wind slammed into him, turning him into a tumbling ball of blue cloth. In the midst of his free fall, clear blue water caught his eye, and he blazed through seals at a speed born of desperation. Suetun, Suryuden no Jutsu. A spindly dragon made of water burst from the source he'd spotted and roared up towards him. It opened its liquid maw wide and snapped him out of the air before the next barrage of wind could hit him, then dove back down to where it had originated. Utakata took a moment to enjoy being submerged in the refreshing water before swimming up, breaking the surface with a gasp. The second his head broke free, a continuous stream of wind hammered him, strong enough to disperse the water immediately around him and carry him over its surface. He rolled gracelessly over fresh green grass before slamming into a tree trunk that knocked the air from his lungs. Utakata inhaled sharply, and by the time the world had stopped spinning around him, a foot was pressed on his stomach, and a small whirlwind circling a couple of fingers was held beneath his chin, ruffling his long bangs. "Who are you?" demanded a young voice. This is becoming familiar, the brunette thought, looking up into his captor's face. A thin-lipped mouth and pupil-less orange eyes narrowed with suspicion stared at him from a bronze-skinned feminine face framed by short, mint-green hair. "I'm nobody, really, I was just traveling along when." "You're lying," interrupted the girl haughtily, "and Taki doesn't appreciate intruders." "I'm not an intruder," the Kirin protested, slightly annoyed he had to keep defending himself on that point. "I was hundreds of feet in the air above you, and, wait, did you say Taki?" "I'm in Taki." He shook his head, wary of the wind at his throat, to clear the surprise from his features. Focus on that later. You must be an amazing sensor to know I was up there, he tried genially. You couldn't have possibly seen me. I'm the greatest sensor there is, Sue. That's why it's my job to protect Taki from people like you. I'm not interested in Taki, Utakata repeated, really. The kunoichi's orange eyes remained hard, and the brunette let out a huff of annoyance. You can tell if someone's lying. Why don't you ask me whatever you want, see what my intentions are? I'll answer honestly this time, I swear. Fine, returned the waterfall shinobi. Who are you? My name's Utakata. Where are you from? Kirigakure. Orange eyes narrowed slightly, and the brunette wondered what she saw in his simple answer. The truth, after all, was far more complicated than the name of his former home. Why were you above Taki? I got lost. I was going to Suna when you attacked me. The kunoichi seemed to relax at that admission, the whirlwind beneath his chin disappearing. Utakata breathed a small sigh of relief as his interrogator stepped back from him, hands on her hips. Now that she wasn't in his face, the Kirinin was able to get a good look at her. She wore a sleeveless white shirt that left her midriff bare, with fishnet underneath that was snug against her petite frame. More fishnet was visible under a white skirt that had slits on each side, and white armlets covered her arms from wrist to lower bicep. A hiatus was wrapped around her right bicep, and some sort of red fabric created an X over her chest, going over her shoulders and under her arms to hold up a burden he couldn't see. What's in Suna? She asked, and her voice suddenly lacked all hostility. She sounded almost wistful. Genuinely curious. I'm looking for someone there. Someone special. Special? The elders say I'm special, Sue, she chirped. That's nice, Utakata offered, trying to politely separate himself from the conversation. Since he'd managed to answer her questions without instigating a fight, he wanted to leave before anything else went wrong. She seemed oblivious to his discomfort, placing a finger to her chin and tapping it in cheery thought. Well, no one else can do what I do. Your abilities are impressive, admitted the Kirinin, but if you don't mind. Who are you looking for? She chirped. Utakata shot her a look of pure bewilderment. Why does that matter? I like knowing things. And you're, her head cocked to the side, studying him, being kinda weird. You don't know anything about me. Don't need to, it's super obvious. Your chakra's really agitated. She paused, then asked, so, you gonna tell me who it is? Utakata sighed, feeling resigned to play the girl's games. Not like she'll know who it is anyway. I'm trying to find the Jinchūriki, ow. His head snapped back against the tree trunk, blown backwards by a sudden gust of wind. The Takinin's expression was suddenly fierce, orange eyes hard with anger, all trace of playfulness gone. Don't call me that, she growled. I'm Fusu. Fusu? What? The feeling of disorientation was dissipating, though now his head was pounding with a mixture of pain and adrenaline. Are you a Jin? He cut himself off, reading the hate in her orange eyes. You said you're special, he corrected cautiously. What makes you special? She didn't answer, just continued to glare at him, breath coming in ragged inhales. Utakata looked her over, the picture of anger personified, scrutinizing her with an intensity absent from his original once-over. Her reaction was too intense to have been anything but personal, but where's her mark? He wondered. Yagura, Rashi, and Naruto all had obvious physical signs of the Bijū they contained, but Fu's outward appearance indicated no similar marker. Maybe she's like me? Fu, he repeated, voice gentle, how are you special? When she still didn't respond, he probed, do you know about the Bijū? She flinched at that, her steely gaze wavering, but continued to stare mutely at the Kirinin. Utakata met her orange eyes, trying to silently communicate some semblance of understanding, but she seemed to be looking through him, sight locked on to something only she could see. If you're a Jin, if you have a Bijū sealed in you, he corrected, noting the way her body shook at the term Jinchūriki, you're not alone. I've got one, too. Really? Her voice was suddenly small, a child learning something new. He nodded as she moved away from him, back to being more curious than hostile. The Rokubi's inside me. And there are more like us. I've been looking for them, for you, if you're like me. Fu visibly hesitated before offering in an unsure voice, the elders say, the Nanabi's sealed inside me. They say? Utakata repeated. You've never contacted the Nanabai? The Takinin shook her head. Why would I sue? I could do what they wanted already. She's like Naruto, the brunette noted, at least as far as her connection to her Bijū. She's definitely been trained better than him. What did they want from you? Someone to protect the village, she replied in monotone. It sounded like she was reciting something from memory that she'd been told repeatedly but had no faith in. To make sure that Takigakure continues to remain safe from invaders. And what do you want? Utakata quietly probed. Fu opened her mouth to respond and then closed it. Hesitation was plainly written across her face, as if she couldn't give voice to the desire she held inside. Knowing how the Jinchūriki were treated, it was likely she'd never been asked, or that any expression of that desire had resulted in something unpleasant. I want to be normal, she whispered. Everyone treats me like I'm, I dunno, diseased. Now that the floodgates had been opened, the timbre of her voice was steadily growing more incensed as more words flowed out of her mouth. My parents have never spoken to me, no one cares about me, everyone calls me that horrible word, Jinchūriki, she spat. And I don't even know what I did, Sue. She cried. They told me to protect the village, and all I've done is stay here and watch for any invaders. But no one ever comes, either from out there or from in here, and no one cares about any of it. I hate them. She hissed, voice pure venom. Then her shoulders slumped, snarl relaxing into something forlorn. Gone was the angry Kunoichi, and in her place was left a figure Utakata had seen far too often in the mirror, a broken Jinchūriki. But I really just want someone to like me for me. She started crying then, her sorrow muffled but not unheard. It was the tears of someone who'd done it repeatedly in solitude, resigned to the monotony of striving for something that seemed so easy to everyone else, but was unattainable for her and her alone. Utakata remained silent throughout the Takinin's breakdown, allowing her to grieve for her loss with as much privacy as he could afford her. She doesn't know. It wasn't news that Jinchūriki were prone to receiving the short end of the stick. He'd experienced it himself, seen it with Yagura, heard about it from Rashi and Naruto. Normally that treatment had a purpose. Yagura was intended to be the Mizukichi who would put Kiri back on the map, and Utakata and Rashi were top-tier shinobi, meant to advantage the villages they served in open conflict. Weapons. But Fu, she wasn't even that. The Hidden Waterfalls military couldn't compare with any of the 5 great shinobi nations, and based on how they utilized their Jinchūriki, they weren't interested in trying. She was a tool, relegated to be used for a single circumstance, but otherwise kept in a metaphorical cage, locked away in the dark. The other Jinchūriki had freedom, limited though it was. Rashi had lived outside IWA, Utakata had been sent on missions outside Kiri proper as he'd risen through the ranks, limited though they were. Even Yujito seemed to possess an autonomy the other cursed jailers did not, especially for one so loyal to her village. But Fu had none of that, just the sad certainty of a life full of unappreciation in a village filled with hatred. Utakata wished he knew how to empathize appropriately, but Fu's situation seemed so far different from his own, sadder in so many ways, he didn't know how. So he sat, waiting, until the green-haired girl's tears dried and she seemed ready to listen to him once more. There are people like us, he said, who have gone through similar trials. I'm trying to find them and bring them together. Why? There's a group looking for the gene, for us, he explained, changing his words at Fu's darkening expression. They're dangerous, and if you face them alone, you'll die. But if we work together, I think we stand a chance of surviving. And if you're willing, I'd like you to come with me. To Suna. At first, he agreed, but then to Konoha. You'd have to leave here, but... You think they'll be willing to be friends? Fu interrupted. That they'll like me? Her voice was lilting, hopeful. Absolutely, Utakata answered automatically. He was this close to recruiting her, and after the disaster with the Nibi Jinchūriki, the bubble user needed a win. It might take time, for some, he continued, Rashi's lack of social niceties coming to mind, but there will always be someone who'll support you. He thought of Naruto, accepting of others heedless of their attitude towards him. Naruto, I'm counting on you. Then let's go. She shrugged out of the burden on her back, a red cylinder several feet long dropping to the ground behind her. Utakata didn't know what it was, but symbolically he supposed it represented a release from the life she'd led thus far. If he could lose the kimono that constrained the Robubi's gift, a vestige of his own hardships in Kiri, he would do so in a heartbeat. He nodded. Let's go. The Kirinin reached for his waist, where his bubble blower was normally tucked away, but grasped only air. He sighed, remembering his tumble through the sky. Maybe you can help me find something first. So what's in Suna? Utakata shot her a quick glance before returning his gaze to the surroundings below. They were headed more south than southwest with his drifting bubble technique, now expanded to carry both Jinchūriki, and the land of waterfalls was giving way to the densely forested land of fire. Like I said before, there's someone special there we need to find. Someone like us. Who is he? That is a good question, admitted the brunette. I have no idea. So how do you know he's in Suna? Utakata hesitated. A discussion of how he knew would mean bringing up a lot of information related to being a Jinchūriki, and based on her previous reactions, he wasn't sure Fu could handle that. But not answering could risk their alliance, and that was far worse. A wry snort of amusement escaped him. It was the same situation he'd been in with Rashi all those months ago, only now with someone who sought to change their situation rather than stay mired in it. The people like us, he began slowly, every word chosen with care, are typically used for war. Trained properly, we're one-man armies, weapons capable of limitless destruction. The major hidden villages have the Bijū divided among them, theoretically to retain the balance of power. Kiri, Kyumo, and Iwa all have 2, and Konoha has 1. Since you were in Taki, the last one has to be in Suna. There's only 9 people like us, Su. Yes. We're lucky it's that small, he muttered, disenchantment coloring his tone. The life of a Jinchūriki was not one he would wish upon any more people than strictly necessary. Anyway, that was a theory I had based on what I knew about global geopolitics and history. One of my friends, it felt weird referring to Rashi as a friend, considering where they'd started and everything they'd been through, but he supposed that was the easiest word to use right now, confirmed my theory. Fu nodded in understanding, and, questions apparently answered, took to looking outside the bubble at the view below. Utakata watched her from his periphery, a small grin stretching across his lips as her orange eyes widened with awe. The brunette left her alone, allowing her to enjoy the splendor of the world outside the hidden waterfall. He remembered having the same reaction in the moments he'd been able to enjoy the different scenery after fleeing from the land of water. They remained in a state of quiet camaraderie over the course of their travel to the hidden sand, taking breaks to eat and sleep as needed. Growing up as he had never granted Utakata the ability to become adept at social norms like small talk, but it seemed Fu wasn't all that different, unsurprising given her background, and was fine with the silence. On the third day, the forest thinned to leafy canopies isolated from each other by branching blue waters. If I had to guess, I would say this is the land of rivers, the Kirini mused. He directed the bubble west, in the direction of the land of wind, and asked Fu, if you don't mind me asking, what's the extent of your abilities? The green-haired girl turned away from the idyllic scene below her, placing her gaze on Utakata and adopting a thoughtful expression. What do you mean? Well, how far can you sense someone? Like a distance? She shrugged. I dunno. Far. Utakata let out an exasperated sigh, the only sign of his annoyance. Okay, well, can you feel where Suna is? Orange eyes closed for a moment, then reopened. No. There's a couple people down there, she gestured to the earth below, but not a village's worth. And your ability to detect lies? The closer I am to someone, the easier it is to focus on their chakra, Fu explained. A lot of times, how people feel is reflected in their chakra. So if they're nervous or agitated or something, it'll show in their chakra. Impressive, the Kirinin admitted. He'd never heard of sensing that proficient, but from a theoretical standpoint, he supposed it made sense. Chakra was a combination of physical and mental energy, so if someone was mentally compromised, that could result in a detectable manifestation within their chakra, assuming a sensor was skilled enough. And right now, he had no reason to believe that Fu wasn't as proficient as she claimed. Then, can you distinguish between different types of chakra? The waterfall kunoichi cocked her head to the side. How'd you mean? Well, not for the first time, Utakata was stuck being unable to elaborate on what he wanted to know without delving even further into the complexities of the Bijū and Jinchūriki, a topic Fu was shockingly ignorant of despite being one. She really is a lot like Naruto. What do you sense if you focus on me? She closed her eyes again, and despite the fact that she couldn't see him, Utakata felt suddenly exposed. You're nervous, no, more like, uncomfortable. Maybe don't focus on how I feel, Utakata suggested quickly, trying to quell his discomfort. It was awkward, being analyzed so astutely, like an insect under a microscope. What about, he paused, thinking of how to phrase his prompt, the nature of my chakra. The nature? Well, it's kinda cool. Soothing. Like being under a warm blanket on a cold night. And I can feel it all over you, like, on your skin. But, Her brow furrowed in confusion. There's a different chakra, and it's volatile. Sticky, and I don't know how to describe it. Dangerous? It's kinda overwhelming, but it feels like it's contained by your chakra. Orange eyes blinked open. Does that make sense? I've never felt anything like it before. That second chakra you feel. That's the Rokubi. It was so strange to hear the perspective of Saiken from someone who wasn't afflicted by the hateful bias the Bijū normally inspired. You've never felt something like that within yourself? Fu shook her head. Should I have? If the nanobi is really sealed inside you, he corrected, I can't imagine why you wouldn't. He scrutinized her, searching again for the physical marking that would plainly identify her as a Jinchūriki, and again came up short. It didn't help that he had no idea what the nanobi looked like, and thus no idea what identifier to look for. Hesitantly, knowing that his question could blow up in his face for a variety of reasons, Utakata asked, You're sure about the nanobi? The Takinin scowled, all geniality suddenly gone. It's what the elders told me. What, you don't believe me, Sue? It's not that, Utakata placated. This was what he'd been afraid of by digging for confirmation, now he had to do damage control. I'm sorry, I didn't mean any offense. I've just never heard of someone like you. Or a village that does what yours did. It's just an anomaly. He sighed, a sad smile playing around his lips. I've discovered a lot of anomalies recently. What's that mean? Stick me with and you'll find out. Fu shrugged, all nonchalance. Whatever. Not like I've got anywhere else to go. Do you think you'll be able to find the person in Suna who has chakra like me? Or, he paused, thinking, not exactly like me, but someone with two types of chakra. The dangerous one? Probably, if you give me time. I can do that. The rest of their journey was accompanied by the silence that had become their third companion, Fu speaking only to give directions as they drifted further into the land of wind and the location of the hidden sand became more apparent to her sensing abilities. Eventually, the village proper came into sight, a collection of brown buildings arranged like an eight-spoked wheel inside a sort of sandy caldera. Utakata directed their bubble down towards a taller building on the edge of the village, and when they were close enough to the roof, it popped, allowing the pair to land lightly. The brunette grabbed some tan garments hanging from a clothesline and threw some to Fu, wrapping himself in a cloak and drawing the hood up to further disguise his features. Can you work from here? He whispered. Fu's eyes were already closed in concentration. Yep, just need time. Got it. Sharp, golden eyes gazed at his surroundings, taking in the array of tans and browns that made up the village hidden in sand. Everything was so drab, he decided, bland colors in a town that had boring architecture and minimal people. There were a couple of mothers watching their children playing in the street below, the kids juggling a ball between them. A feeling of wistfulness bloomed in his breast as he observed them. Must be nice to be so happy. It's so nice that things are finally returning to normal. Oh, I know. Ever since that boy's been gone, the village has been so pleasant. Utakata's ears perked at the gossip below him, something in the way the second mother spoke reminiscent of his own past. It wasn't like he had anything better to do until Fu found the sand Jinchūriki anyway. I meant more with Kazekage-sama. We lost so much in the Konoha invasion. Utakata gasped. What? What? Fu echoed. Whatever part of the conversation he'd missed continued uninterrupted down below. You're right. We've had to take the good with the bad. And Godame-sama seems to be doing well so far. We need to go, Utakata announced. But I haven't located that chakra yet. Doesn't matter, there's a bigger problem, the Kirinin said. He threw off the tan cloak and pulled out his bubble blower, walking over to Fu and creating a sphere that encased them both. It lifted them into the air, and Utakata directed the bubble east towards the land of fire. What's going on? We spent all this time getting here, and now we're just leaving. Something happened, he offered. I don't know what, but it sounds like Konoha might have been attacked, which means we need to get back as soon as possible. This thing doesn't move very fast, Fu observed. It's convenient, not quick. The The green-haired girl eyed the sky speculatively before her fingers began to form seals. What are you? Futon, Rapusho. The drifting bubble accelerated east as the violent wind palm expelled air from the west. Utakata was thrown against the sphere's translucent surface by the sudden movement, grateful that his method of transportation was slightly more durable than his normal bubbles. Ah! Just tell me when to stop. Fu yelled over the howling wind. Utakata decided it wasn't worth responding, and instead focused on keeping the bubble sturdy and whole. They made it all the way back to the land of rivers before Fu had to take a break, but Utakata found himself impressed by the time they'd made. He looked down over the flowing waters below while Fu panted, using the serene blue to try and find peace while anxiety coursed through his veins. How long until you can use that jutsu again? Now that he knew they could make haste, it was hard to go back to their sedate method of travel when it seemed like Naruto and Rashi could be in danger, the results of Suna's apparent invasion unknown. Fu glared at him. Give me a minute, Su. Sorry, Utakata offered, abashed. It wasn't the first time he'd spoken out of anxiety for his mission rather than thoughtfulness for his surroundings or travel companion, and it likely wouldn't be the last. Something about the other Jinchūriki, Yagura, Naruto, being in trouble seemed to override all his normal sensibilities. I'm not ungrateful, I'm just nervous. Really, he continued as the green-haired girl's expression remained unmoved, it's amazing what you did. Fu let out a huff. I'll start again as soon as I can. That took a lot out of me. Utakata made a mental note to stay quiet during the remainder of their journey, unwilling to risk saying something else that could potentially offend the Takinin. The hours dragged on as Fu alternated between using the violent wind palm and taking rests to recover her stamina. Day faded to night, and by the time dawn broke and the sun was fully risen the next day, Konoha's tall buildings were visible in the distance amid the towering treetops. The bubble user breathed a long sigh of relief at the sight, noting no obvious damage to the portions of the village he could see. Fu's energy tapered out at that moment, and as the drifting bubble slowed down and she panted beside him, Utakata's golden eyes were drawn to a large swath of ravaged forest. Several miles of uprooted and broken trees littered the ground amid the out-of-place sand dunes covering everything. She regained enough breath to ask, what happened here? No idea, Utakata replied, but it can't be good. This is what I was afraid of. Fu hummed in thought but didn't say anything else. Utakata directed the sphere to the devastated landscape, letting it pop and landing on a sand dune. From the floor, the extent of the damage appeared even greater. The Kirinin felt tiny among the fallen trees and open carnage. This kind of damage, a Kage could easily pull this off. I'm sure Rashi would have fought back if he and Naruto were in danger, but there's no lava. Hey, Utakata. Hold on, Fu, I'm thinking. But someone else is here, Su. A lot of someone's. Utakata whirled around to face her. What? Several dozen Konohanin dropped from the surrounding trees, porcelain masks hiding their faces. One of them stepped forward and demanded in a flat baritone, surrender peaceably. The Hokage would like a word with you. Utakata heaved a tired sigh and glanced at Fu. The green-haired girl was visibly tired, but still tense, orange eyes darting around at the overwhelming number of ANBU with healthy distrust. He waited until he caught her attention and then shook his head. Slowly, she relaxed from her defensive position, and when the Kirinin judged that she wasn't going to do something stupid, he raised his hands and told the Leaf Shinobi, "We'll do as you say." At least this way he could get some answers. Chapter 10, The Monkey's Politics. We are out of options. Mu's voice was coarse, like the gravel of the village he ruled, all hard edges and zero empathy. Kirigakure has gotten its hands on the Rokubi, which means we've officially fallen behind. We cannot fall behind. So you like to say. His father's voice was neutral. It was the tone Inoki adopted when he was attempting diplomacy, and suggested his resistance to the knighting Tsuchikage's intentions. It would have been a novel deviation from the norm. You're sure there's no other options? Mu scoffed. I taught you better than that. Do you know what can stand up to these Bijū? Inoki hesitated before saying, their true power is unknown. Because the Shodai Hokage was a naive fool, not because we were ready for them, that Tsuchikage asserted. Though his voice was low, it sounded like thunder to the young redhead. I witnessed his folly firsthand. But he is dead, the Bijū are free, and the other countries have already leapt at the opportunity. If we do not capitalize on the Yonbi now, we will lose everything. An oppressive silence filled the space left by the Tsuchikage's words. Rashi backed away from the door he'd been eavesdropping at, an unknown tension building in his gut. He was starting to regret trying to drop by to surprise his father when Inoki finally spoke, a hint of resignation echoing in his timbre. Very well. Your will shall be done, Musama. You've made the wise choice, Inoki. As Tsuchikage, you will find that the right decisions can sometimes be quite difficult. But fret not. Once Rashi becomes the Yonbi Jinchūriki, I will ensure that he is trained to his ultimate potential. He will be Iwagikyu's strongest weapon. Rashi sat on the floor with his back against the hard stone wall of his jail cell, dark eyes closed in quiet contemplation. At least, it would have been quiet if not for the unceasing clank 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 of Han's armored footfalls against the stone floor. Can ya stop? The redhead groused after another minute of continuous noise. The loud pacing stopped. You promised me freedom, Rashi, the giant Jinchūriki accused, his deep voice underlain with barely concealed rage. Rashi opened his eyes to show his fellow Iwa that he was at least paying attention. This, he gestured with open arms to their surroundings, is not freedom. Think I planned fair this? The lava user shot back. It ain't like I want to be Konoha's Prina anymore and yeah. No? I didn't see you fighting to get away when Konoha's ANBU showed up. Han snarled. Ya mean after ya beat th shit out of me, they put us under genjutsu, and then took our strength? Rashi bit out, sarcasm thick as syrup dripping off his tongue. Really seemed to have a lot fight in ya, too, didn't ya? Han unleashed an animalistic bellow and slammed his gloved fists against the iron bars of the jail cell. The metal reverberated with a long clawing in response to the Iwa's fit of rage. Let us out. That'll work, Rashi noted dryly, dark eyes closing in a vain attempt to return to a state of peace. Han would eventually wear himself out, just like every other time they'd fought so far. If it wasn't for the fact that the Gobi Jinchūriki had already shown he was capable of spite for long periods of time, the redhead might have thought his fellow rock shinobi had a short memory, that they'd gone through the same motions multiple times since being incarcerated with no change in their status quo was the height of insanity. In the beginning, he had told Han to calm down and just be patient, but that had just resulted in more arguing. So he'd given up and allowed the giant to bellow into the void until he was tired. After spending decades living as a hermit, a couple of weeks in an underground jail with 2 square meals a day wasn't enough to faze him. Dark eyes snapped open again when the door to the dungeons emitted a low creak. It was too early for dinner, he'd memorized the guard schedules early on, and they were punctual to a fault. His gaze drooped into lazy scrutiny as an ANBU operative approached his cell. A pair of cuffs was tossed onto the floor of his prison. Put those on, ordered the leaf shinobi. Rashi shrugged. If ya say so. He cuffed himself, and when the shackles were on, the ANBU opened the jail door and moved aside, a gesture for the redhead to exit. Rashi followed the unspoken directive, allowing the Konohanin to place a hand on his shoulder and march him towards the entrance of the dungeons. Han growled as they walked past his cell, and Rashi asked, "You're not talking him?" "No." The redhead dug his heels in, forcing the Konohanin to stop as well. "I ain't going nowhere without him." White porcelain turned to stare at him, betraying the only surprise the redhead was likely to evoke. Silence reigned between them for several minutes, the quiet finally broken when the dungeon door creaked open again to admit a second ANBU with another set of chakra-restraining handcuffs. Rashi's dark eyes roved around the dungeon while Han grudgingly cuffed himself. Always watchin', eh? When both Iwa were free from their cells and accompanied by ANBU, they were led through a series of tunnels and then up multiple flights of stairs until they ended up before a set of ornate double doors. Though they weren't designed the same, Rashi was familiar enough with the overall style to know what was behind them. He sighed, waiting with surprising patience as the doors were opened and they were brought inside. The Hokage's office was surprisingly simple. A large wooden desk piled with stacks of paperwork sat before a series of square windows that framed the circular space. Though it was hard to tell from his vantage point, the windows seemed to give an open view of the hidden leaf village sprawled below. That view was partially obscured by 3 people. Seated at the desk was a woman with platinum blonde hair, her ample bosom only somewhat covered by a green jacket, elbows on the desk and fingers laced together under her nose. A second woman with short, dark hair and a dark kimono, a small pig clutched tightly in her arms, stood beside her. On the blonde's other side was a large man, though still small compared to Han, with spiky white hair, a red vest, an olive-colored shirt and pants, arms crossed over his broad chest. Rashiaji. The redhead looked to the right to find Naruto and a boy with hair the color of dried blood sitting on a couch. Actually, the leaf Jinchūriki was standing, excitement visibly thrumming through his body, while his companion merely stared with teal eyes rimmed by black rings of too many sleepless nights. The Iwanin's own eyes narrowed. So Brat found Ichibi, Utakata'll be pleased, he thought with dry humor, his mental voice carrying a sourness born from his long history with the hidden sand. What did ya do, Brat? Naruto raised one hand to scratch the back of his head, an embarrassed grin on his face. Well, I kinda told Tsunade about you and Utakata and I. But I didn't have a choice. He continued hurriedly, fearing some retribution by the redhead. She's the Hokage now, and she's super scary. I know all about Sannin Tsunade. And Jiraiya, he added, shifting his gaze to the white-haired man in the corner. So you're not mad? The blonde's voice was hopeful, his naive optimism on full display. Rashi sighed, taking a seat in one of the two chairs placed before the Hokage's desk. Truthfully, ever since he and Utakata had started training Naruto, he'd expected some sort of confrontation with the hidden leaf. It was unrealistic to expect that a village as large and powerful as Konoha wouldn't eventually realize it had foreign shinobi on its soil, especially since said foreigners were spending copious amounts of time with its Jinchūriki. Just because Iwa and Konoha shared a tense history didn't mean that the redhead thought the hidden leaf was stupid. That he and Utakata had been allowed so much time with Naruto free from Konoha's hierarchy was a stroke of luck. Shit happens, he finally grunted, offering neither absolution nor anger. Humph. Well, that's a change. Rashi looked over his left shoulder to where Han had settled himself into the corner diagonally opposite Jiraiya. His brown eyes were narrowed in anger. You've become introspective in your time here? How novel. Don't pretend you know everything about me, Rashi shot back. Because you have so many layers, Han remarked snidely. Enough. Tsunade barked. I didn't have you brought up here to settle your own petty squabbles. I didn't ask for you at all, she continued in a dangerous tone, staring pointedly at the armored Iwanin. Make it so I don't know you're there, and I won't physically remove you from my office. Han remained silent, dissatisfaction clear in his slumped posture. Rashi guessed that his reluctant obedience was more a desire to stay out of the dungeons than any sense of being intimidated by the blonde. The door to the office opened at that moment, and all eyes turned to look at the newcomers. Utakata shuffled into the room out of the ring of Anbu surrounding him, golden eyes, or at least the one not hidden by his bangs, roving over the gathered figures. Utakata and I, Naruto whispered as the Kirinin took the seat to Rashi's right and placed his cuffed hands in his lap, the perfect picture of politeness. Oi, Tsunade, Sama, he added tepidly at the older woman's glare, were you treating Rashiaji and Utakata and I like this? They're not gonna do anything. Focused on the blonde Jinchūriki, Rashi barely spied a second person emerge from within the Anbu guard. This one was a girl with short, mint green hair, the forehead protector tied around her right bicep denoting her as a hidden waterfall kunoichi. She settled herself in the back right corner of the office, where she shot an unreadable look at Naruto and the Sunanin on the couch before scoping out the rest of the room. Jiraiya cleared his throat, and the redhead returned his attention to the pair of Sannin before him. Naruto, sit down. But Jiraiya, Naruto. Utakata shook his head when the blonde's attention turned to him, the quiet utterance of his name enough to temper the boy's outcry. At the mist shinobi's gesture, Naruto fell silent and sat back on the couch, blue eyes flickering nervously from his pair of teachers to the Sannin and then to the Sunanin beside him. Tsunade flicked her hand in a gesture of dismissal, and the Anbu who had escorted Utakata and the Takinin left, closing the door behind them. Only one remained behind, and despite the smaller group, the office still felt too cramped. So, she began, let's chat. I've been informed by Naruto that he's been receiving training from you too, she said, pointing with her index and middle fingers at Utakata and Rashi. For how long again? By her tone, Rashi got the distinct impression the question was rhetorical. Sadly, Naruto was not that astute. Like 6 months. Tsunade's honey eyes flickered over to the blonde before resettling on the pair of seated Jinchūriki. In a clipped tone, she continued, apparently the geopolitical landscape changed while I've been away, because an alliance between Iwa and Kiri would have never happened back in my day. Wouldn't even happen now, Jiraiya cut in. To be fair, Hokage. Utakata said, trying to be polite and clearly unsure what the appropriate way to do so was. Neither Rashi nor myself are affiliated with our villages anymore. As evidenced by the glowing biography Kiri provided on you, Tsunade agreed, rotating an open book on her desk so that the two renegades could read what was inside. Both leaned forward to get a better glimpse, finding a fairly simple rundown of the bubble user's skills and prowess penned next to a headshot and a reward of 50 million Ryo for his return to the hidden mist alive. And you, she continued, slamming the book shut and leveling a hard gaze at Rashi, Yotan no Rashi, Bitsuchika's-san. We're quite familiar with your reputation and exploits. Rashi-aji, you're related to Akage. Rashi let out an annoyed sigh. Sadly. Like you haven't spent years reaping the benefits of that connection, Han interjected waspishly. Yeah, think now's time to do this? Again, Tsunade slammed her fist on the desk. Everyone shut up. She rubbed her temples to alleviate an apparent headache as the rest of them heeded her command. Bitsuchika's-san, a Kirinin with a bounty bigger than most of my jonin, the Kazekage's son, she added, gesturing to the redhead beside Naruto, and I can't even begin to imagine who the hell you two are, she finished, gaze flickering first to the green-haired girl and then to Han. I also can't say I really give a damn right now. Since Naruto didn't seem all that forthcoming, I suspect that you two are the brains of this operation. So why don't you tell me why you're here in my village? That's complicated, Utakata tried. Then uncomplicated, growled the blonde. Because from my vantage point, we're harboring fugitives from IWA, Kiri, Suna, and apparently Taki, two of whom we're nominally allied with, one which Jiraiya informs me has been a black hole for information, and one of which we've been in prolonged conflict with since my grandfather's era, none of which is conducive to establishing diplomacy. She bit out. Thanks, Jiraiya, for bringing me back. This is much better than the life I was leading. Will tell ya anything ya want to know. Rashi. Utakata sounded aghast. But brat's got ter go. Rashi oi. Yeah, don't need to hear this, Naruto, Rashi told him, and his tone lacked some of the edge he'd addressed Tsunade with. We'll find ya after. Naruto, go, Tsunade seconded brusquely. The boy stood up, his features folded downward unhappily. Fine. Come in, Gaara? He asked. No, intoned the Sunanin. I will remain here. A fleeting expression of naked betrayal crossed the blonde's features, but the dark-haired woman beside Tsunade approached and led him away at a glance from the Hokage. When the door closed behind them, Tsunade returned her attention to the IWA Nin and asked, why did you want him to leave? Rashi's deep breath was filled with the resignation of decades of boredom. Daya know what it's like to be a Jinchūriki. Beside him, Utakata jerked, his head swiveling to look behind him. The redhead ignored the movement, too used to the teenager's strange twitches to pay it any heed. Life sucks. Your village uses ya as a weapon, something to win wars, and nothing more. And people see ya as a monster, something inhuman. And ya ain't given a choice to be one, not like being a Kage, it's something forced on ya. Behind him, Han let out a snort of contempt. But Naruto didn't grow up like rest o' us, he continued. For some reason, your Hokage didn't treat him like that. He didn't know what he was, and he still chose to fight fair village. How is any of that relevant? He don't need to know kinds of lives we've led, Rashi said. Jinchūriki ve all been sad and miserable and tragic, and most us ve come to accept hardships being cursed. Tsunade's honey eyes narrowed. You're all Jinchūriki. At Rashi's nod, she continued, do you have any idea what the odds of more than one Jinchūriki coming together are? And you're telling me there are 6 Jinchūriki in Kono? I'm sorry, am I boring you? Rashi followed her gaze to find Utakata squirming beside him. The brunette's eyes kept flickering behind him, and the IWA Nin decided to see what kept drawing the teenager's attention. In her corner, the green-haired Takinin's expression, which had started as neutral at best, could only be described as thunderous, lips turned down in a deep scowl and orange eyes glaring holes through the blonde Sannin. If we could refrain from saying, Jinchūriki, Utakata whispered, apparently trying to make it so only Tsunade and Rashi could hear, that would be appreciated. Fu doesn't really react well to. You are Jinchūriki, Tsunade snapped, and I'm not particularly incentivized to grant you favors right now. In a calmer, if brusque, tone, she added, I don't mean to downplay your individual trauma, but I'm still waiting to hear what exactly any of this has to do with our current situation. Rashi fixed Utakata with a pointed stare. When the brunette finally felt the force of the Iwanin's gaze, he started slightly and uttered a surprised, "Oh, right." Turning to Tsunade, he asked, "What do you know about the current Mizukage?" "Well, seeing as how I've been Hokage for all of 5 minutes." 3 days, Jiraiya interjected. "Very little." "It hasn't exactly been at the top of my list," came the sarcastic response. "If you hadn't noticed, we're recovering from an attack. His name is Yagura," explained the bubble user. "He's the gene," he coughed, then continued, "the Sanbai is sealed within him. And he's being manipulated by Akatsuki." Jiraiya let out a low whistle. "You buried the lead there, kid." "Jiraiya, explain," Tsunade demanded. "Akatsuki's a mercenary group who've been known to take some pretty high-end missions," the white-haired man elaborated. "Big risk, but big reward. Rumor has it they're credited with taking down a small country in the span of a night. To give you an idea of how bad they are, Orochimaru was once a member." Tsunade rolled her eyes. "Great, and Uchiha Itachi is a current member." The Sannin threw her hands up. "Even better. They're also looking for the Bijū," Utakata offered carefully, seemingly aware that they seemed to be sitting on a powder keg. "I can confirm that," Jiraiya added. "My network told me the same thing. I thought it was a weird rumor, but I guess not." "I trust your sources, Jiraiya," Tsunade said. She turned to Utakata. "I don't trust you. How do you know all this?" Utakata took a deep breath and admitted, "I overheard Akatsuki talking about it, back in Kiri. They're using Kiri's resources to figure out where the Bijū are. If you're trying to document Akatsuki's roster, Hoshigaki Kisame is also involved. This is all very helpful, but still beside the point. Why are you here?" "I came to Konoha to find the Kyuubi Jinchūriki." Utakata winced as he realized what he'd said and murmured an apology to Fu before continuing, "Rashi and I ran into each other along the way. When we came here, we found Naruto and started training him." "Why did you start training him?" Tsunade asked. "Even considering whatever your goal is, that's beyond unorthodox. I also can't imagine an Iwanin training someone who looks as much like the Yondaime as Naruto does." "Yeah, don't know half of it. If you didn't know," Utakata interjected hastily, apparently unwilling to lead the Hokage down the path of the trio's rough introduction, and probably for good reason. "Each Bijū has his own special ability. Yotan, Shabandama." Rashi gestured behind him to Han with his cuffed hands. "He's got Futten." "Really?" Utakata sounded genuinely surprised by the announcement. Rashi couldn't guess, then shook his head. "Anyway, we discovered that the Kyuubi's ability is an amalgamation, I suppose, of the other Bijūs." Tsunade arched an eyebrow. "Meaning, Naruto can use all of our abilities." A grunt-like noise sounded out from the couch. "Ah!" Utakata opened his mouth as if to say something in response to the Tsunanin's interjection, but then closed it again, at a sudden loss. Rashi decided to pick up the thread. "We got him a skill base, till we had to find more of us. And what was the purpose of finding more of you?" Tsunade demanded. "You seem to keep avoiding that subject." "He wants to save Mizukage," Rashi replied, thumbing at Utakata. "Rashi, yeah, think you're getting out here without telling full story?" The redhead scoffed. "Don't be daft." He turned back to Tsunade. Way he told me, Jinchūriki'll have enough power to fight Akatsuki and rescue him." Tsunade again arched an eyebrow at the Iwanin, her face the epitome of skepticism. "And you're willing to go along with this plan? You? Excuse me, my suspicions. If your intention is to drag Konoha into this insanity, I'm going to have to disappoint you." "She's not the only one," Han growled. His armor clinked with his annoyance. "Rashi, I did not come with you to an enemy village to be caught in more politics. If I'd known your plan involved being used to begin another war." "It ain't my plan, yeah moron," Rashi shot back. "I told that when we left Iwa. And I ain't interested in a war. Only one who's got a stake in Kiri's kid. I'm here to make sure you and I don't get killed by Akatsuki." Han grunted, dissatisfied with the older Jinchūriki's explanation. "It's never the whole story with you, Rashi. You made false promises. Tsunade again slammed her fists against the desk. This is why I didn't invite you. She barked. Shut up and settle things on your own time. So long as you're in my village, in my office, you'll follow my rules, and the only thing I care about right now is figuring out how much of a threat you are to Konoha. Hokage-sama, if I may. Tsunade nodded at the lone ANBU agent who had stayed behind, and he continued in a monotone. Sandim-sama was aware of Rashi and Utakata's presence since they first contacted Naruto. Utakata turned to Rashi, visible golden eye wide with surprise. The redhead shrugged in return, unperturbed by the revelation. Every village, every kage, really, had its own tricks the others were not privy to, and the hidden leaf spying on them didn't surprise him nearly as much as it did the teenager. It even explained how they'd been caught so quickly upon returning to their campsite. He could not form a sensible theory for why Iwagakure and Kirigakure would ally together with no apparent intention of harming or kidnapping Konohagakure's Jinchūriki, and so he tasked me with overseeing their activities. And did their intentions become any clearer during your observations? Their underlying intent was indeterminable, but if they intended harm to the Kyuubi Jinchūriki or Konohagakure through his absence, they had plenty of opportunity which was not capitalized upon. While some of their training methodologies might be construed as harsh, no damage meant to permanently cripple Konohagakure or her shinobi was done. Jiraiya let out a short chuckle. Well, that's a ringing endorsement if I've ever heard one. And if Sensei let Rashi of all people stay here, well, doesn't seem like they have anything nefarious planned, does it, Tsunadeheim? It lends credence to their story, Tsunade allowed. But that only explains these two, she continued, gesturing to the two sitting Jinchūriki. It explains nothing about the other three. Contrary to what Rashi said, my goal was not just to rescue Yagura, Utakata explained hurriedly, sounding a little desperate. Akatsuki's mission is to kidnap the Bijū. I figured the people who that affected deserve to know they're in danger. Your altruism is noted, Tsunade observed dryly. Utakata hesitated, then admitted, in the spirit of honesty, it wasn't done out of altruism. At least not originally. I needed allies to rescue Yagura, and it just so happened that my best chance was with those who were in the same danger he and I were in. Since Akatsuki seems to be using Kiri as a base of operations, it made sense that so long as more Bijū were free, Yagura would be safe, I suppose. At the very least, I figured they wouldn't take the sanbai from him while they could still use him to control the village. Tsunade rubbed her temples with both hands, eyes closed. This just screams international incident, she muttered. If it's any consolation, the brunette offered in a conciliatory tone, none of us have any real loyalty to our villages. Or, former villages, if you'd prefer. The only one who does seem to care is Naruto. As reassuring as that sounds, you'll excuse me if I still find it a little hard to trust the words of a Nuke-nin Jinchūriki and the notorious Yotan no Rashi of the Second Shinobi World War, even considering my ANBU's reporting. Jiraiya cleared his throat. Tsunade, I know this defines unconventional, but before you make a hasty decision, maybe we should take a moment to think this through. The slug Sannin arched an eyebrow at her former teammate. You wanted me in this position, Jiraiya, and now you're going to try to make decisions for me? Nothing like that. But Naruto has a rapport with Utakata and Rashi, and since we know he's not an official shinobi, he must have learned everything from them. I can't say I know anything about the Kyuubi's powers since Kushina never used them, but if what they're saying is true, they seem like the best people to teach the kid his powers. And if what I know of Akatsuki is true, which I'll grant you is limited right now, he'll need every advantage he can get. And if you're worried about them being a bad influence or causing trouble, well, I'll vouch for Gaara. The Sunanin turned to stare at the Sannin. You will. I'll vouch for Fu, Utakata added, taking advantage of the opportunity. And I've got Han, Rashi said. He's mad now, but he'll get over it. The armored Jinchūriki grunted. You have a high opinion of yourself. None of you have any authority here, Tsunade barked, so your words aren't nearly as reassuring as you think. Then she sighed, the fierce demeanor she'd retained throughout their conversation tapering off into resignation. Jiraiya, I can tell you have an idea. Just spill it. You should let them stay, he suggested. With provisions, of course. They'll be able to train Naruto to be ready for the looming threat, and we may be able to learn more about the other villages in the interim. You're not supposed to say the quiet part out loud, Jiraiya, Tsunade groused. The toad Sannin shrugged, grinning slightly. I hate playing the politician, you know that. Besides, they put all their cards on the table, it's only fair we do the same. It's our table, idiot. We make the rules. She returned to rubbing her temples. I don't know how much information we could offer you on our villages, Utakata interjected. Jean, people like us aren't always privy to daily operations, but if it helps, I can give you some leverage. He reached to the side, using his cuffed hands to grab a small scroll attached there and placing it on the desk. The lone ANBU agent immediately interceded, grabbing the scroll and holding it close to his body, his back to the Hokage to protect her from any foul play. Sorry, I should have considered how that would look. If you unseal the contents. Tsunade glanced at the weapon the ANBU pulled from the scroll, then returned her attention to Utakata. What am I looking at? That's Nuabari, one of Kiri's legendary 7 swords. You can consider it a token of gratitude. Or a bribe, Tsunade replied dryly. Regardless, Jiraiya has a point. She sighed again, and after several moments of quiet contemplation, announced, fine. If you're going to stay in Konoha, you'll do it under the following conditions. 1, she began, ticking the point on her fingers, you'll each subject yourselves to a complete medical exam, including an inspection and evaluation of your seals by Jiraiya. 2, you'll continue to train Naruto to use his Kyubi abilities, as it were. Jiraiya will oversee that as well. I've got things to do, Haim. Tough shit. You wanted to keep this mess going, you can see how it plays out. Your perverted tendencies can wait. Jiraiya grumbled his displeasure, but said nothing else to indicate he would disobey her directive. Tsunade continued, 3, you'll stay away from the main portions of the village. I would prefer if only the people in this room know of our arrangement. From what I gather, many in Konoha don't know Naruto's secret, the less that know yours, the better. You'll stay in the Senju compound, there's plenty of room there for all of you. Any questions? No? Great. Now get out of my sight. Utakata and Rashi stood from their seats, the brunette offering a respectful incline of his head to Tsunade. At a gesture from the ANBU, Gaara, Fu, and Han all followed the pair out, expressions varying degrees of apathy, anger, and disdain. Then the 2 Sannin were all that remained in the office. Tsunade sighed. You're going to be the death of me, Jiraiya. Ha! I was about to say the same thing. I've got to train the kid, check 6 different seals, and make sure they don't blow up the village. You sure know how to pile it on, Haim. You're welcome to take over running the village instead. I would be more than happy to return to my life. That life was beneath you and you know it, Jiraiya informed her, tone serious. He rapped the desk with his knuckles twice in a gesture of goodbye, and in a cheerier voice said, you did good today, Haim. We'll figure this whole thing out, don't worry about it. Get out of here and do your damn job, perv. Jiraiya threw back his head and laughed as he walked out the door and closed it behind him. Han. The door slammed in his face. Rashi hit it repeatedly with his open palm. You're stuck here, same as me. He called. Yeah, may as well talk to me. Find your own prison to sleep in. Shouted the giant. Rashi growled in frustration before turning and walking away, storming down the hallway. Utakata met him at the end, where it opened into a spacious, old-fashioned atrium. If it's any consolation, Fu won't talk to me either, he offered. She took the room across from, Han, is it? And why do ya think that'd make me feel better? Utakata shrugged, though he still managed to look inordinately pleased. Commiseration. If ya knew what it took to get him here, ya wouldn't be so glib. We can compare stories if you'd like. It wasn't like I had a walk in the park either. Boo-hoo. This your mission, ya should be happy we got this far. All things considered, this has gone surprisingly well, Utakata admitted. 6 of the 9 Jinchūriki under one roof. You've got to admit that this is unprecedented. That's fair sure. Time will tell if that's good or not. I'm bettin' not. Utakata rolled his eyes. You're so skeptical. Look at all that we've accomplished so far. How can you still be so negative? Years of experience, kid. Jiraiya walked into the atrium and nodded to the pair, his dark eyes settling on Rashi. He jerked his head to the side. Why don't we have a little chat, HM? The redhead shrugged. If ya say so. He left the Kirinin behind to follow the Sannin to another room within the compound. This one had bookshelves lining the walls, filled to the brim with different tomes. A thick layer of dust coated both the floor and shelves. With the exception of a large wooden table placed at its center, the room lacked other furnishings. It might have been an office when it was actually used, Rashi mused, but now it seemed barren, as void of life as the rest of the Senju complex. Although now that it was inhabited by 5, 6 whenever Naruto showed up, Jinchūriki, perhaps that feeling would go away. Jiraiya slapped his palm against the surface of the table, which had been cleared of dust, a grin playing about his lips. Hop on up. Rashi shot him an unamused look, to which the Sanin's grin only grew, but complied with the request regardless. They stared at each other for a moment before the white-haired man raised an eyebrow and prompted, "This is the part where you show me your seal." "Oh, is that what we're doing here?" "You heard Tsunade," Jiraiya said while the Iwanin shucked his leather armor and long-sleeved magenta shirt, "medical and seal exams. And trust me, you do not want to piss her off. Jiraiya would know." Both men looked over to find the blonde Hokage entering the room. He spent decades doing exactly that. "You finished for the day already, Haim? Damn senile blowhards just want to blather on about how to best utilize resources, and rebuilding our strength, and blah blah blah." She rubbed her temples. "Honestly, how the hell I let you talk me into this? Anyway, I needed a break. This seemed like a good place to start." She laced her fingers together and then stretched out her arms so that her knuckles cracked. "Let's see what you're working with." A green aura enveloped her hands before she swept them slowly over the redhead supine form. Silence enveloped them as the medic's scan progressed, broken only by a thoughtful when she reached his chest. "This is a mess," Tsunade announced with clinical detachment. "What did you do, get into a fight and then just ignore your injuries?" You're a genius, ain't ya?" "One in a generation," she retorted. As the Sannin continued her scan, Rashi finally offered, "Han hits hard." "You don't say." "Hard to tell you two would ever come to blows with how chummy you were back in our meeting earlier," Jiraiya said with false cheer. The redhead turned his head to meet the toad Sannin's dark eyes. "He's got reasons to be pissed." His gaze returned to the ceiling. "We all do. You're taking the blame?" Jiraiya asked. "Certainly a step up from your father. I ain't nothing like him," snarled the lava user, rising from his position. Tsunade placed a hand on his chest and shoved him back against the tabletop. "Stay still," she barked. "We're not done yet. And Jiraiya, if you could not antagonize Rashi, I'd appreciate it. I'm sure you remember what he's capable of." "Fair point, Haim. I'll play nice." All was quiet among the three until Tsunade finally stated, "Well, all things considered, you're in pretty good shape. No disease, good weight for your height and age. Aside from these recent injuries, there's nothing I wouldn't expect from examining Jiraiya." "Thanks Haim, really appreciate that. So you're done then?" Tsunade's hand, positioned over the redhead's ribcage, pushed down, and the sharp crack of Rashi's ribs breaking was drowned out by the old hermit's shocked shout of pain. "Sorry about that," Tsunade said without a shred of remorse. "It goes against my personal ethos to allow your injuries to go unhealed properly. Hurts less if you don't know it's coming." "Yeah, Rashi gasped. He felt relief flow through his chest as her hands once more glowed with green chakra, healing his broken ribcage and soothing weeks-long discomfort. She moved on to the hand Han had crushed, realigning the carpals and phalanges into their correct places. The redhead grimaced with each movement, though he managed to stay quiet this time. "So," Tsunade began, "are you going to tell me why you and Han were fighting? It's been a while, but last I recall, you were more than capable of handling yourself. Han's got a temper, and he's pissed at me something fierce. I noticed. If yet lived under Inoki's thumb, yet be pissed, too." Tsunade grunted, but when she didn't press him for more information and instead moved on to his shoulder, he arched an eyebrow and asked, "You're not going to ask me anything else?" "He blames you for his problems. It's not exactly an original story. Is there anything else I should know that you haven't already told me?" "I don't know what you're fishin' fair. Han didn't injure your hearing, so I know you heard me earlier, but I'll say it again for you. I only care about your intentions and how they affect Konoha," Tsunade informed him. "And while it's not unheard of to accept those seeking asylum, it's fairly atypical for the seeker to be a former enemy, especially one of your lineage." She withdrew her hands and stepped away, prompting Rashi to sit up and take a deep breath. Given our history, Rashi wasn't sure whether she was referring to their personal history or their villages. Not that it particularly mattered. "I think it says enough about your situation that you'd come here and willingly stay without causing trouble. You're kinder than Tsuchikage, that's fair sure." The slug Sannin shrugged before turning and walking away. "Do no harm. Your attention to Naruto is reward enough. I know it ain't my place, Roshi offered, but yet do well to treat kid good. Or he'll end up like rest us. Never took you as someone to give advice for the betterment of a Konohanin, Roshi. Kid reminds me someone, that's all, grumbled the redhead. Yeah, Tsunade admitted, me, too. Why else do you think you're here? She waved a hand through the air in farewell. Anyway, he's all yours, Jiraiya. Gotcha, Heim. Jiraiya cracked his knuckles. Now, where were we? When Jiraiya finished analyzing his seal and proclaimed him good to go, Roshi found himself wandering outside into the Senju compound's courtyard. Fall had started to arrive while he'd been imprisoned, and the dark of night had begun to settle over Konoha, painting the area in quiet pinks, purples, and blues. The redhead looked up, finding a half-moon fighting against the sunset to bathe the world in its serene light. What a day, he mused. Then his dark eyes caught sight of blood-red hair, and he released a long-suffering sigh. And it's gonna get longer. He leaped to the roof, maintaining a healthy distance from the young Sunanin who was perched there with his gaze fixated on the moon. You're, Gaara, A turn of the head found emotionless teal eyes staring at the older redhead. He let out a low noise of affirmation. You are, someone who helped Naruto. Roshi nodded, every movement cautious. I suppose ya could say that. Gaara seemed to accept this confirmation and returned his gaze to the lunar body above them. Why are ya out here? It is comforting. The Sunanin's tone was flat, as dry as the desert that surrounded the village he hailed from. It chilled the rock shinobi in a way he hadn't felt in well over a decade. I know what ya find comfort in, he replied, the slightest edge in his voice. Thing inside ya, Ichibi, it dawn make ya a stargazer. Gaara's eyes turned towards him again. You know mother? Yeah, think that, thing's your mother. Mother has always been with me, Gaara intoned, and for such a sensitive topic, Roshi was once more struck by the fact that the younger redhead seemed to hold no emotional attachment one way or the other for their discussion. She has helped me become strong. Your strength's what I'm worried about. And if ya can control it. He could see the sand shinobi lift one arm and flex his hand experimentally, gaze fixated on the play of muscles and tendons the action caused. Control, Are you strong? Stronger than me if I lose control? I did it afore, so I can do it again. But can and want two different things. Gaara nodded slowly, though Roshi couldn't say if the gesture was done as an expression of understanding or just acknowledgement that he'd responded. Naruto says strength comes from others. Before him, I believed strength came from myself. But he is stronger than I. From anyone else, the admission would have sounded bitter. From the Sunanin, it was just matter of fact, and that in of itself surprised the Iwanin. I do not have control, nor do I have strength. I am powerless. Roshi barked in laughter. You're anything but. If ya knew what I knew. And what do you know? The Iwanin blinked in surprise. For the first time in their conversation, Gaara actually sounded interested. But while the younger Jinchūriki so far seemed saner than his predecessor, which wasn't saying much, the dark rings around his eyes were a firm reminder that he was still the jailer of the One Tail. Roshi's experience with that particular threat made him leery about the younger redhead regardless of how he seemed at first blush. Nothing, ya need to know now. Gaara's gaze returned to the moon, interest apparently lost. Roshi arched an eyebrow and decided it was safe enough to take several steps closer before sitting down, legs dangling over the ledge and 20 feet of distance between them. Daya know why you're here? Another stretch of silence. Roshi was beginning to find them just as unnerving as the blatant psychopathy the boy's predecessor had displayed. In the Sunanin's presence, his memory of the previous Ichibi Jinchūriki seemed to be permanently fixed at the forefront of his mind, and the quiet felt too much like the calm before the storm. Before Gaara gave in to the impulse of the One Tail and killed them all, there is a plan. To save the Jinchūriki. The word rolled off Gaara's tongue slowly, as if he wasn't used to it. He turned again to face the older redhead. You seem displeased about it. Ya ever see many Jinchūriki in one place? It ain't a party, that's fair sure. Naruto believes that Jinchūriki can understand one another. Gaara's forehead crinkled in thought. I am not sure I believe him. Me either. But here we are, Gaara blinked, the intensity of his gaze suddenly broken. I wish to believe him, he admitted tonelessly. Things would be better, I think. But others are strange. They have hated me, and I do not care about them. His words were familiar, like those Roshi himself would say, had said, probably, in defense of his reclusive lifestyle, and yet he sounded more open, perhaps, to Naruto's idealistic naivety, unlike either his predecessor or the Iwa Nin. He wondered if it was the blonde's influence already at work, or if he was just prematurely judging and comparing the Sunanin to his predecessor based on his own history with the One Tail. Perhaps a little of both. I don't get it either. But you're okay with it all? I have nothing else. Roshi huffed, an amused smirk dancing over his lips. I join th club. Yeah, ain't a fool, I'll give ya that. He rose to his feet and dusted off his pants. Y'll never be normal, so don't even try. But ya can learn to be better than ya are. Teal eyes bore holes into Roshi. It was as if the older redhead was dangling bait in front of a ravenous pike. How? Find something to center yourself. Meaning, ya need something that ya can use to split yourself from th Ichibi. Something nothing and no one can take from ya. He reached within his shirt and withdrew a small scroll hidden in a pocket by his heart. With only a couple of inches unrolled and a quick application of chakra, several stones fell into his palm. It had been months since he'd sought the warm comfort of his stone collection, with its mixture of cool edges and smooth surfaces. Most of the gems he'd crafted himself over the decades, years of finding the right ores or soil types and utilizing the right amount of pressure, heat, and time, each one a testament of his prowess. They each had their own unique characteristics, historical, medicinal, spiritual, and while Roshi couldn't say he believed everything about them, creating and learning about each had helped him survive his seclusion. The Iwa Nin held them up one at a time, letting the moonlight glint through them so Gaara could see the different colors of his collection. Amethyst, emerald, garnet. That one, Gaara interjected suddenly. The color is familiar. The Iwa Nin squinted at it. Looks kinda like your hair. The sand shinobi seemed transfixed by the color, so Roshi lobbed it to him. A tiny tendril of sand whipped out from the gourd on the boy's back and caught the gemstone in midair. Gaara held out his hand, and the red crystal fell into it, drawing the gaze of the teal-eyed boy like a moth to a flame. Keep it, Roshi told him. I think ya need it more than me. That is, kind. He looked up, fixing Roshi with a flat stare. Naruto said you were his friend. That you would help me as you helped him. Teal eyes flickered down to the garnet in his hand, admiring its glow. Roshi snorted. Kid gets under your skin, that's fair sure. If nothing else, he ain't no liar, too stupid fair that. Ya can trust what he says, even if it don't always make sense. Gaara grunted and turned back to the moon. So it seems. Though it wasn't the first time the Sunanin's heavy gaze was off him, this time the conversation felt over. It was more than Roshi could say he expected. Gaara seemed introspective, detached, perhaps, but as a former recluse, the lava user could hardly fault him that. At the very least, he didn't appear to be the same murderous psychopath that his predecessor had, although there was always a chance he was wrong. Yeah, should remember what I said, Roshi advised in parting. Find something to center yourself. He played with a perfectly round pink opal, its surface opaque but lovingly polished. Out of his entire collection, the opal was his favorite piece. He'd created it not long after his niece had first made contact with him, all youthful excitement and naivety, the first person to make him feel like he was more than just the Jinchūriki the hidden rock had made him. Gaara needed something similar, though what, or who, it was, Roshi didn't know. Although, if he could somehow negotiate a deal to keep 6 Jinchūriki, 5 of whom were foreign entities, nominally the opposition, safe in a village considered by history to be his mortal enemy, anything seemed possible. He collapsed onto the futon in the room he'd picked, marveling at the feel of soft bedding for the first time in too many years. I could get used to this. That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.